the traditional allure of the famous road. Maybe there is something in each person's depths as pure as the Silk Road, a slow but sincere sense of being called to discover what lies closer and farther than we can see. Do you ever notice it happening? That moment when you almost reach out for those far away in history or on a different planet and try to find and hold onto something that just escapes us in our daily lives. Just imagine a very delicate breeze gently touching you. The air brought the most subtle bell noises from distant camels. That noise has soothed sleepers for ages and announced each new era of humans. The Silk Road existed from antiquity. Even the term caravan brings up pictures of processions slowly traveling across impressive territories, filled with silk, spices, and other treasures. All of those interesting points were true too. However, it was infinitely more complex than just a channel for merchants and purchasers. It consisted of many moving, linked paths, a living example of the countless experiences of those who passed, with every thread symbolizing bravery, sacrifice, and desperate dreams. Its streets were always bustling with goods and also with the important currents of thoughts that guided and comforted civilizations, the ideas that accumulated and grew into beliefs, creative paintings, and pioneering tales that followed the migrations of people. For thousands of years, this amazing network of paths formed the main connection, allowing the largest Eastern and Western societies to greet one another. The current never stopped flowing in history, marking our need to learn, to question, and to reach for more understanding. In addition to being a series of tracks, it showed the amazing strength and determination of humanity. It influenced the progress of empires and the shape of the known world, and it also transformed the personal lives of those who journeyed on it. This way, we will make our journey together once more, filled with appreciation and openness, and really listen to the beautiful, meaningful hints from it that are now meant for us. Chapter 1. Saying goodbye to the Imperial Center and packing up silk. We set out on this great spiritual journey from a place so magnificent that it's nearly beyond belief. A city that once ruled over a powerful empire. Maybe that place is called Chang'an, or the Perpetual Peace, the name alone suggesting stability and grandeur. Envision its orderly wide streets full of people, sky-high pagodas and their roofs shining in the sunlight. Think about how its busy markets were full of colors, noises, and smells, as products from many places inside and outside the empire were shown for sale. We might choose Luoyang as our start, another imperial treasure, whose air is echoing with the rich talks of emperors, wise words by prominent historians, and the gentle wishes of its citizens. Here, in this city that birthed early civilization, the mood is alive with a feeling of its own, a fancy mix of culture, impressive power, and the barely noticeable, but strong, effects from thousands of people's actions and feelings. Take another moment to think about the holy mood of getting things ready for a fully laden caravan. Since for many, the path ahead was as perilous as sending out a ship into unexplored waters. Bactrian camels would fill the unmatched grand courtyards with their wise calls as caravan masters supervised. Throwing in occasional shouts and ropes hitting arched back crates fell in rhythm. The men would hurry, checking all they needed, mending equipment, explaining last-minute details, and their faces showed purpose, though they seemed a little nervous. Come with me into the dark storerooms, as the true grain of the Eastern world and the reason for the name's honor were preserved there. Under candlelight, or maybe from oil lamps, great mountains of glistening silk cloth would be revealed. Picture the texture of the stone. It seems smooth, but is astonishingly strong. The walls would shine with a stunning display of imperfect imperial yellows, lively crimsons and scarlets, peaceful blues and celadone greens, and amazingly white pearls. Such fine silks that people claimed a whole bolt could fit through a finger ring were cherished by the empire and were sent to distant places for palace decoration and for nobles in lands few could picture. Nearby, in carefully staked positions, are fine porcelain items like vases, bowls, and figurines painted with small scenes of mists over mountains, rivers filled with fishermen, flying phoenixes or dragons. Each little vessel represented fine Chinese art, and across the sea it represented a part of home. But, even with all their astonishing beauty and incredible value, these things had weight in human emotion far greater than their material worth. Was there ever any way that those shining bundles of silk could match the pain expressed by a wife's quiet tear as she said goodbye to her husband? Her heart was filled with pride in his toughness and also a serious, clinging worry about his safety. Could the cost of that beautiful porcelain ever truly reflect the mix of emotions felt when an elderly mother, with her hand touching her son without saying a word, feels that leaving him this time may be their last chance before death? Every package of goods and each treasure they wrapped was loaded with the possible wealth to come, hopes for survival and thriving and worries that danced at the edges of proud smiles. Older and wiser, dads asked for one last chat and quietly, with their regular voice hinted by the unusual emotion inside them, gave advice or comfort. Additionally, characters often spoke of being watchful, negotiating well, and remembering their roots along with their family's reputation. Young children playing with their handmade treasures may not realize just how long and far away their parents will be. At times, they ask innocent questions such as, "When will you return, Baba?" Asking for a story about the son's home could leave the grown-ups feeling emotionally exhausted. Deep feelings of love held these families together, making it easy to sense their strong desire for the windswept, secure environment at home, the warmth at the fireside, and the comfort of their people. Rarely seen, this inner cargo was held close by each traveler, making them appear far more settled and sure of themselves than they really felt on the inside. Who were the people that traveled so far? There was not only one typical member among them. Although many began their journeys as merchants with hope of making a profit from moves in the world market, there were many others who embarked on adventures. Scholars, likely with less merchandise and a heavier load of writing tools, eagerness for ancient knowledge and interest in debating unusual ideas, wandered from place to place. Certain people were dedicated to making the pilgrimage, hoping to follow the examples of venerated sages, visit sacred locations, keep a holy text or keepsake, or take with them the spirit of divinity. Officials sent by the emperor, looking very official and self-assured, served to send messages, make alliances, and collect information, playing a role in changing the course of nations. Naturally, there were individuals, mainly younger men, with strong desires and imaginative minds filled with tales of faraway lands, different animals, and riches to earn. Why did they willingly leave their secure homes and stable lives to travel somewhere tough, where they could not be sure they would ever return? You can gently start the conversation. Was it only the allure of huge wealth, enough to turn their families' lives around and secure their children's futures, that brought them en route to the land of gold? For a lot of people, this motivated them greatly. Was it because soldiers were sworn to uphold their duty, were ordered by the emperor, served only for the glory and safety of the empire? The way they changed supported it as well. Perhaps it wasn't a plain idea, but something softer that touched inner feelings and soul instead. They craved to see the landscapes hidden behind the mountains, check out the wonders for themselves, get up close to the exotic, and understand why the customs and beliefs of the other were not their own. Perhaps, for lots of people, it involved a strong mix of down-to-earth skills and a fascination for the world's mysteries. Drawn by the impressive power of the road, they made the decision to go, feeling a range of sadness, hope, fear, and excitement. When the main caravan came together, the procession of many people, heavy camels and sturdy horses began, and little by little the sound of the city dipped out of sight and hearing. Instead, people would hear the wheels of luggage, the steady trot of the animals, hushed talking by the men, and almost unnoticed sighs from those leaving. Those tears would be fast or slowly wiped away, depending on the individual, while dust rose along the road. Each tear became a tiny mark of how loved they were and how scared or uncertain they felt ahead. I was on my way. In Chapter 2, we explore the role of the Hashi Corridor, which bridges the desert and old fortresses. When China's caravans crossed the great gates leading to the imperial capital, they left the capital's defense behind and proceeded down the Hashi Corridor. This designation stated that the west was to the west of the Yellow River, a major road both for trade and movement, stretching day after day over hundreds of miles. It seemed like a special route, developed by God's hands for this purpose, running between the Chilean mountains to the south and the Gobi Desert to the north. It was within that long funnel that the real change from the comfortable agricultural regions and bustling cities to the challenging lands of the west became clear to those heading west. You could start to feel the air become different. I could already sense the first hints of desert wind. As it was turning from the calm, close-to-home breezes we had back in the capital to a more noticeable and determinate type of force. Those winds from the west and north carried little sand and lusk grains everywhere which would coat your clothes, make your food taste strange, irritate your eyes and leave a constant, rough taste in your mouth and in your waterskins. Their breath hinted at the wide, dry places ahead, a soft prelude to the tough conditions that we would experience for most of the trip. The light would also become crisper, the shadows more detailed, and everything could appear remote under a huge canopy of sky. Run along this vital line, like old beads on a once-used thread, were pieces of the Great Wall. Sometimes these aren't like the massive, crenellated castles we imagine, and this wasn't common around these old sites in the West. Most often, these defenses were large and difficult to overcome, built using earth, layers of flattened soil, and bundles of nearby reeds. Even though ages of sun, wind, and frost had worn them down, these earthen walls were a visible reminder of how the empire tried to secure and guard its borders against people from the nomadic regions. At these major points of the southern route, strong fortresses stood such as Yumenguin, the Jade Gate Pass, and Yangguan, the Yang Pass, both linked to history and stories. Think about how, after a long, dry journey, the caravan starts to see the outlines of the Jade Gate Pass. With its walls rounded by years of exposure and often white sky overhead, this structure would stand there solidly as a study in blues and browns. It meant a lot more than just being a garrison. It served as an important administrative and mental barrier. All travelers were expected to pay the toll, produce passports and permits, and only officials here first received information about the untamed West, movements of warring groups, and the health of the nearest oasis. Alternatively, at these places, travelers could look forward to one last letter from home or await the news from family they hadn't heard from in ages. For many hundreds of years, going through Jade Gate toward the west was nearly a spiritual experience. It meant I was leaving the familiar, well-arranged world of China to enter the unfamiliar Xiyu. Since it was an extensive region with few clear borders, people saw it mostly as a place where many tribes or groups were found and who were commonly called barbarians, with unique customs, languages, and many supposed unknown dangers. Going through that gate was probably overwhelming, blending great fear with tremendous excitement. They were starting their journey into the adventure that the world just begun. Since these frontier fortresses were far apart, many travelers spent several days at them for rest. When soldiers were tired, they could rest their limbs. When they were thirsty, they could drink at the garrison's wells. And when their animals needed feeding, the soldiers took care of them. The garrisons set up in isolated regions lived through harsh, bare, and sometimes unsafe conditions. This existence consisted mainly of solitary guard, only occasionally improved by visits from supply caravans or ruptures with raiding groups. In charge of defending the empire's borders, they always had weathered faces and eyes adjusted to constantly taking in what lay beyond the horizon for hours at a time. Friendships that last just a while might happen when a traveler meets a soldier, stopping to talk, have a cup of wine, or simply spend some time together. It is no secret that Tihi wind blowing through the hushy corridor carries with it a weight of history. As it sweeps through scores of broken, ancient parts of the Great Wall, an old song can be heard. Some people argue that, if you set your mind to it on a clear moonlit night, even now you can hear the faint, ghostly marching of a cavalry patrol that stood guard on the desert's eastern frontier 1,000 years earlier. In the strange stillness, you could hear some of the sad songs of these exiles, men and women sent this way because of their political actions or just bad luck, all encapsulated in their voices that speak of sorrow and a longing for a home they will never go back to. Many warriors experiencing punishment left through these fortresses in sadness, and those lucky enough to succeed or escape would return here with great happiness and relief. Near the main passes and in other key places along the corridor, there were always little, simple shrines. Sometimes they're basic mud brick constructions or piles of stones that leading pilgrims used to bless with bits of faded prayer flags or bright rags. At this point, people would stop for a brief prayer, hoping their travels in unsafe territory would be pleasant and productive. They burned incense, gave little food and drink, and wanted the blessings and protection of their ancestors, Buddhist bodhisattvas, Taoist immortals, or any other deities they prayed to. Doing these rituals so near the border of the structured world, afraid of all they could not see, likely brought them great hope, a real feeling that they were being supported by something more than just themselves. I would also hear other tales, the ones that made the hair stand up on your arm, shared out of earshot as an afterthought, close to the fire we lit from dry dung, since we saw no trees around. Even with the harsh desert air, these stories could still make my hair stand up and my hands quake. There were reports of souls who could never rest in peace, including travelers taken by accident or fever, merchants attacked by bandits and soldiers left behind in unknown fights. Because their lives were cut short, their souls now wandered the barren places, always stuck between worlds and sometimes seen as shadows or heard in the sighing wind. Other stories were about ghosts moving with a purpose, looking for their own home and loved ones among the deceptive moonlight or dust devils, always hoping for peace. Depending on whether people understood them as true ghost stories or only as stories of the sorrow and fears during the times, these tales wove a different kind of atmosphere into life in the Hushy Corridor. It seemed that spirits from the past were able to get close and memories were very vivid and occasionally unsettling. All sorts of unusual sounds, shadows and wind could carry hints, messages or laments that had been left by people who walked these paths centuries past. Not only was the Hushy Corridor a popular route, but it also inspired many, challenged them, and revealed the real strength of its people. Chapter 3 discusses the Gobi Desert, surrounded by the movements of sand, tears from the heavens, and illusory mirages. Exiting the well-known but challenging Hushy Corridor, the Silk Road leads straight into the grand and imposing Gobi Desert. It was not the usual bright, extensive sand dunes found in Arabia or the Sahara. Instead, the Gobi was mostly a huge area of gravel plains called Sai, alternated by desolate outcrops and low, worn-down mountains that seemed to show just how old and dry the land was. Simply put, the name Gobi comes from Mongolian for a place without water or huge and dry, and that sums up the area well. However, despite all the harshness and bleakness of the region, the Gobi had a surprising and inspiring beauty whose joy and grandeur could move people to a new and deeper insight. Those months were extremely hot and everything seemed to be testing us to the maximum. A powerful sun high in a stark, mostly cloudless sky gave the earth an intense burning that brought up waves of heat from the ground. You could feel the air growing slow and heavy, and the horizon would fade as the warm currents made everything blurry. Wherever I looked, whatever life I found was sheltering itself from the sun, hiding beneath a stone, at the base of a dune, or among the desert species of shrubs like saxaul and tamarisk. In the worst of the heat, movement for both travelers and their animals was minimal, and plodding along through the heat felt never-ending. Even isolated, the silence could be huge, only disturbed by the sound of walking, the camels, and every now and then a gentle gust. As the sun started to slide slowly toward the west, something amazing would happen. If clouds were shaping the landscape, their bulk would be colored in brilliant orange, soft pink, light lavender, and dark purple in true artistic flair. The hot weather of the day would start to ease, and soon a cold breeze would move across the wide, open land enveloping everything. There were cold nights in the Gobi Desert, especially in the months of spring, autumn, and winter, and the temperature would quickly decrease by many degrees when the sun disappeared. Those who traveled would bunch together, using whatever fur, strong wool, or blanket they owned to protect themselves against the cold. Fires built from limited argol, burning slowly and spitting light, helped to bring comfort to my friends and me as the darkness outside doggedly increased. Not to mention the sky. That Gobi night sky felt like something straight out of heaven, truly shining in all its glory. Away from the clouds of human destruction and far from artificial light, the atmosphere looked so pure and deep that it felt, had one dared, one might have fallen straight up within it. The sky was filled with stars so bright that it looked as easy to reach out and pick them like diamonds placed on an endless velvet sky. If you were to look at the Milky Way from within our galaxy, it would brighten the whole sky, filling it like a celestial river, maybe representing the Silk Road in the heavens. It isn't hard to imagine how, while immersed in that still, marvelous quiet under a starry, unmoving sky, a lot of tired travelers must have felt a little of the deep, natural, awe-filled awe humans experience before something truly old and powerful. In the Gobi, there was always a risky struggle with the limited resources, and the thing people needed most for survival was clearly water. Because this region lacked water, it was rare and far more valuable than anything else treasured at the time. The few oases we came across in the middle of a barren sea of landscape were incredibly far away and hard to reach. Such locations were held secret by experienced traders, nomads, and caravan guides for generations, and they were prized as carefully as a holy book or a treasure map. The finding of a spring, even since its water was somewhat salty, a well concealed in the earth or a natural rock depression full of captured rainwater, was considered a true life-saving blessing and a reminder of God's mercy. Bactrian camels were famous for being able to survive without drinking for weeks in the desert because they had specially adapted, but horses and donkeys and humans couldn't live without water for even a few days. As a result, making the most of water was a tough and unpleasant practice. I drank little by little, often keeping each drop in my mouth as if it were a precious jewel. Giving their water to others during emergencies was a true act of kindness and trust. There were times when the desert acted with cruelty, causing further problems for the desperate and dry. All desert cultures share legends of mirages that seem like lakes no matter how hot the day was. They could be remarkably exciting. Wide, deep water, full of cool blue, seems to stroke gentle, sandy shores while palm trees or other pleasant plants sway as if welcoming you. While travelers, desperate for water, guided their animals toward these hopes of water, their hearts full of excitement, the lakes would appear, disappear, and then cruelly vanish into the sand and gravel. Was what happened, as some claimed, merely a result of evil jinn or demons, leading those who deserved bad luck into great suffering? Could it actually have been nothing but a natural light trick? Sunlight passing through cooler air that made his sight seem misleading, the mind just wanting what it desperately needed to survive? They reminded explorers, over and over, that their dreams were unreal and the place they found themselves in was hard and desolate. The Gobi Desert had no mercy. It stripped everyone there of anything unnecessary, leaving only essentials. The urge for water, hunger, the attempt to avoid exposure to the elements, and a strong human desire for friendship and support when things became dire. Men and women had to overcome the ultimate degrees of being worn out and also had to battle fear, hopelessness, unbearable loneliness, and the danger of death. The endless, blank emptiness might make us think we were all alone and unimportant, drifting along in a universe that did not care. At the same time, what made everyone suffer could also lead to lasting friendship, since people depended on each other, shared the challenges, and reached out in small ways that brought encouragement. With their lives ever threatened by death and surrounded by constant hardships, did people dwelling on this dangerous land stick to their faith? Were survival instincts and the urge to live the real reasons we survive? Most likely, it seemed impossible to separate the two. They would have prayed strongly and in urgent ways for guidance, for water to be miraculously discovered, for protection from the horrible sandstorms, known as black blizzards because they covered everything for days and could bury caravans, and for freedom from sickness or assault. Many would have held on to talismans, amulets, and sacred relics, finding safety and motivation in what they thought they would do. At the same time, however, or working hand in hand with their strong faith, was a constant determination to survive, the learnings from the desert, the skills of those leading the way, the strength of the animals, and a steadfast refusal to quit. Such amazing power made it impossible to overlook where we belong in the large, often uncaring universe. The Gobi taught the travelers more than distance. It took away false beliefs, tested their resolve, and exposed their basic, durable nature. All who made it through the hard journey now carry the deep quietness, open landscapes, and lessons learned from the desert. Chapter 4 discusses Dunhuang, where art and stories hidden in the Mogeo caves still exist. After facing so many hardships during their Gobi Desert ordeals, arriving at Dunhuang must have made it feel like they had wandered into a colorful world after months of black and white. A sort of miracle occurred. The desert was filled with a perfect paradise without warning. Along this part of the Shul River, along with other nearby streams fed by snowmelt in the Chilean mountains, quiet abundance flowed with life. The land was filled with a vibrant and vivid green that stood in sharp contrast to the harsh browns and yellows of the desert. Picture the exhausted travelers, facing cracked, burnt skin and dusty eyes, perhaps close to losing hope after many hard days. noticing a dark line on the horizon for the first time. As they got nearer, these branches began to look like the tops of poplar and elm trees, moving lazily in the desert wind, the sound of their leaves giving a soothing call to shade and water. Not long after, they would find themselves around the earthy scent of soil and greenery and possibly flowers, a fragrance worth more than any import from other cultures. Wheat, millet, and barley fields would be alive with green under the sun and nearby. The orchards enjoyed for apricots, peaches, plums, and Dunhuang grapes would appear pleased to give sweet, juicy rewards. Dunhuang, which means blazing beacon, was not only important for its food and rest, but also for many other reasons. Over many years, the city served as an important crossing point on the Silk Road, where people from the north and south crossed or parted at a key spot before the Taklamakan Desert. Here one could find both spiritual enlightenment and vitality, and for the duration, it grew into a major center of Buddhist art, literature, and belief in the entire network. Those who had lived through the harsh sun-ravaged area of the Gobi found real healing in seeing Dunhuang. With its nicely maintained land, running water channels, quiet village homes, and busy people. Just having access to cold, fresh water, a large variety of food, apart from dry meals, and someplace safe in the oasis was a very rare and valuable gift. Yet Dunhuang presented an astonishing site equipped with such value and staying power that its appeal would last for ages upon its unearthing. The Mogeo Caves, known more poetically as the Caves of the Thousand Buddhas. Just a little way from the city, you would ride a gentle camel or donkey to a large, imposing conglomerate rock wall that covers over a mile. In this steep cliff, many labors of years have built up hundreds of sacred, carved caves featuring different sizes and levels of complexity. From the 4th century CE, numerous rulers continued this important enterprise for almost 1,000 years, until it ended in the 14th century. Each cave was a real expression of great devotion to the faith as it spread from India into China via the Silk Road. Those who traded safely through dangerous desert areas or hoped to enjoy future good fortunes would sometimes have a cave dug out and decorated. Noble families financed grand artistic works to earn more good fortune for themselves and the previous generations. Those devoted to Buddhism, whether ordained or not, gave what they could: labor, faith, and art to help this effort grow. Going from the extreme desert sun into the sheltered peace and art of the caves was always a new experience, one of beauty, faith, and artistic skills. Most of the caves we visited had walls and ceilings filled, all the way to the bottom, with intricate and colorful murals. They weren't only decorations. They captured the principles, tales, and astronomical knowledge found in Buddhism. Imagine large scenes showing some of the Jataka tales, each telling of how the Buddha learned compassion and wisdom. Imagine lots of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, all with their own characteristics and actions, calm and peaceful, each with an inward and calm look. Think of celestial musicians, Apsaras and Gandharvas, seen in the pictures, soaring through the sky and playing lovely music on their ethereal instruments. You can see detailed mandalas, which are spiritual charts meant to outline both the universe and the route to wisdom, where their geometry helps focus the viewer's eyes and thoughts. The painting remained vibrant and vivid after decades, as a result of dry storage over many years. It contained rich blues because of powdered lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and the green and red were from malachite and cinnabar. Over the years, much of what we know about them has disappeared, leaving them simply a part of the whole. What impresses me most in their art is the strong passion they show, the stunning artistic skills they use, and their deep knowledge of the Bible stories. Inside the cave temples, many people spotted massive statues that had been sculpted or carved from rock and, more often, shaped with clay over wooden skeletons and painted. Some chapels were meant for each person's use, whereas others were stunning because of their enormity. One of the most famous is the giant Buddha in Cave 96, almost 100 feet tall, whose huge form fills the place, calm face showing a gentle smile and his eyes turned downward in boundless compassion. While these images might be quietly small or impressively large, each seemed to hold true a quiet sense of dignity and peace. According to sensitive people, the spiritual power in the temples carved into these hundreds of caves is still present because of countless Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and enlightened beings constantly adored for 1,000 years. The Borobudur is a popular topic among legends and stories. A number of devoted monks, while practicing long meditation in these secluded areas, reported that deities suddenly appeared on the stone walls and became luminous as they saw them. Others described hearing messages that sounded like sermons reaching them from the caves, though the source was never clearly known and the teachings were instinctively grasped and felt. During the days that are quietest, when the moon lights up the desert and sacred cliffs, people who spend time here, locals, monks or others admirers, say they see a soft, unexplained glow inside the caves. It seemed that the old stories, so brightly brought to life, were being pulled up from the ashes and the figures awoke, faintly alive, with a flicker of intelligence shining in their eyes. They were not meant to make people uneasy, but instead told of mystery, wonder, and the close presence of the higher powers. The inspiration for this brilliant music was deep and endless. It was the deep love for Buddha's teachings, along with their compassion, that led patrons to donate so much to build such lasting masterworks. It was also a powerful enthusiasm for art and the amazing dedication and skillful work of countless nameless artists. These talented people lavished their spirit and hard work onto turning these simple walls into lovely and revered places. Beneath everything else, there was a deep belief in the power of beautiful, sacred spaces to comfort, uplift, and guide people for decades and centuries ahead. Fortunately, Dunhuang was not only a place, but also a happy accident that preserved a lot of important knowledge. For a long time, one of the caves, now called Cave 17 or the Library Cave, was hidden, with its entrance blocked, probably early in the 11th century to protect what it held from invaders. No one knew about its existence until a Taoist abbot named Wang Yuanlu happened upon it in 1900. Among his ruins, he found an enormous collection of manuscripts, scrolls, and documents spread out over 5 centuries. His collection also held numerous Buddhist scriptures, both known and unknown, plus collections of secular materials, folk stories, favorite poems and songs, accounts of history, documents of the government, private letters, business contracts, language courses, and medical handbooks and almanacs. Because they were written in many languages of the Silk Road such as Chinese and Tibetan, but also Sanskrit, Pali, Sogdian, Khotanese, and even Uyghur, these writings offer a thorough look at life and history across Dunhuang and along the Silk Road at the time. Because the journey on the Silk Road was long and tiring, Dunhuang meant much more to its weary travelers than simply a stop on the way. It was a place where you would feel physically strong again, but mainly a place to connect with true values and deeper goals. Human creativity, deep loyalty, and an insatiable faith in beauty, wisdom, and meaning managed to flourish even in such adverse situations, leaving behind something that awe and inspire many generations. The whispers heard in the Mogeo caves were not only memories from a distant time. They still stand and always have, as symbols of peace, kindness, genius, art, and the inner force of people to break through deep darkness. Chapter 5. Taklamakan: Why people are drawn to the Sea of Death and ancient cities hidden full of sand. After the protective oasis of Dunhuang, with its flowing water and sacred artwork, the Silk Road draped road from the life-affirming sanctuary of Dunhuang and faced what was considered the most challenging and scary area, the huge Taklamakan Desert. Such a huge desert of sand dunes, often extremely dry, filled even the most experienced caravan leaders with both great respect and deep fear. There are several meanings for the name Taklamakan, which is usually said to mean either you can go into it but not come out, or simply the place of no return. Basically, and often literally, it was known as the Sea of Death, Darya-i Halak, whereas much of the Gobi is made up of rocky or gravelly plains called Sai. The Taklamakan was mostly a series of huge, moving sand dunes. The dunes weren't just ordinary sand piles. They soared hundreds of feet above the ground, and their rounded tops often twisted and turned into impressive, always changing forms because of persistent, powerful winds. Not only were these winds worrying because they were unpredictable, but they would sometimes create very fast, unexpected dust storms which locals would call Karabaran. Sandstorms could cover visibility in mere feet, shut out the sun, cause even groups of traveled soldiers to get lost and, in the worst of cases, leave people, animals, and all belongings covered by a heavy blanket of sand and loess. Taklamakan desert sand was very soft and fine, and it could enter every material easily. It constantly irritated the eyes, stopped up the nose and mouth, made breathing distressing, and caused the skin to become red and sore. Journeying through the center of the Taklamakan was, in effect, looking for multiple forms of danger, since neither branch of the Silk Road passed through it but stayed nearby mountains. Remove the reason for them being there or their bad judgment, and losing your bearings in the sand was an inevitable and deadly result. Should there have been landmarks at all, they could vanish or be radically changed in a single night by the dune's constant motion. When the sun was out for long and hot summer days, it poured its hard light down, reflecting off the sands and making the area feel extremely hot. However, weirdly, nights, especially not during summer, could lead to a sudden, strong chill when the sun's heat went up into the clear night sky. Because water inside the Taklamakan was extremely rare, unreliable, and usually brackish, it was seldom consumed by humans. Not even many of these guides shared the secrets of where all the treasures were, preferring to keep them hidden along with their odd sixth sense for surviving and recognizing hints in this empty land. People around the desert oases frequently heard frightening stories about caravans with hundreds taking supply routes and being swept away with no trace. The sand took them. The sand drove them mad, and a storm covered them in silence, leaving nothing to remind us of their sad end. They were not invented just to scare children. They usually described the hardships faced by explorers here. Any of these mishaps or more all at once could result in the death of the whole group. Sometimes, the endless sands of the desert would blow away, revealing only the white and silent remains of people and their pack animals, serving to continually remind and disturb anyone who attempted the same dangerous walk. Anyone wishing to get through the Taklamakan surely felt immense mental strain. Every day called for fighting off lurking fear, deep sorrow, a terrible sense of being on their own, and the clear realization that they were without protection in such a cruel, dominating environment. Even so, the Taklamakan's reputation as a deadly place seemed to attract some people to its strange and abandonedness. The massive, overwhelming world all around and the almost total silence, except for the whispering wind and camels' steady steps, might cause anyone to meditate, sense the rawness of nature, and feel how tiny they are. Even during the terrible times and so much loss, there were tales of mysterious and exciting things hidden beneath the desert sand. For many generations, the stories were handed down about cities where rich commerce on the Silk Road happened. Buddhism thrived and desert dwellers lived until the desert buried them all. A number of stories said the gods made them pay for a wrongdoing which led to their desperate escape in the night of horrifying sandstorms. After the 4th century CE, when desertification made Lowlan's location untenable, the city became a source of whispering legends among people living far away. Its old buildings, kept well preserved because of the dry climate and first explored by Sven Hedin and other explorers early in the 20th century, illustrate a skilled civilization that ended, just taken over by the desert's unremitting spread. A number of tough Uyghur or Kyrgyz souls who chose to build their lives right on the edge of the Taklamakan desert or brave fast passages from one oasis to another, sometimes said that they had spotted mysterious, ghostly spirits far off. They'd mention witnessing the gleaming images of watchtowers or the hazy suggestion of city walls from a faraway sandstorm, just as ghost ships pass over a sandy ocean. They also reported that they heard soft, sad music, barely heard bells, and mysterious voices speaking languages that people had forgotten which came from the ground on the stillest of nights. Is what we hear a melancholic song from all these spirits, missing the beauty of their life and their old world? Yet another possibility could mean that it is just the presence of the desert itself, the wind whirling along every slope, making music with the air, scaring the senses of anyone nearby, seen or unseen, while the intense silence tickles their imagination. In the Taklamakan, you almost felt the secrets and sad histories of people around you everywhere in the air. Realizing that all the constructing sentences can be difficult and you can simply neglect a building's purpose. In the past 100 years, archaeology has proved the truth of these legends by finding numerous small, solid settlements from the ancient period buried in the Darim Basin's sand. Those mummified human remains and the other finds from the region take us back to earlier ages and remind us, in a powerful way, of the individual lives lost unceremoniously to the sand eons ago. Those lucky caravans that managed to cross paths with the Taklamakan, or those adding to their remarkable endurance by going straight across, arriving at Kashgar, Yarkand, or Khotan, felt a deep new life had begun. They had come out alive after surviving the Sea of Death. Without doubt, what happened to them would have stayed with them, showing how powerful nature can be and how delicate human lives are. Yet, it would show how brave and strong they were, how crucial good planning and teamwork were, and perhaps, to many, just how lucky or favored they really were. Taklamakan seemed to unite history, myths, and horror, so that everything blended into the desert sands. The land was full of old, heartbreaking memories, and anyone who walked there could feel the ghostly and dynamic sighs the wind brought from its empty face. Chapter 6. Going through the Pamirs, seeing the world's icy roof, unending love and sense of the mountain gods. Having managed to navigate the extreme, scorching heat and moving sand in the great deserts like the Gobi and Taklamakan, travelers on the Silk Road found themselves faced with an entirely new, just as formidable and more magnificent challenge: the huge Pamir Mountains. As early geographers and locals knew, the range held famous names such as Bam-i Dunya, meaning roof of the world in Persian, or similar titles in various languages. It acted as a faultless giant ridge that served as the source for the Himalayas, Tian Shan, Karakoram, Kunlun, and Hindu Kush, which sprung out in every direction. Crossing the Pamirs was to enter a stunning, dangerous, and spiritually powerful area of rock, ice, and air. Consider how hard it must be to step by foot up a steep, rocky path. At first, the air was thick and the smell was dry, but it would become clearer, cooler, and gradually unbearably cold, leaving me to take each breath slowly and with some effort. The land would change in ways that would almost seem unexpected. Instead of sand or gravel desert, travelers now had to go through rocky valleys, near rivers fueled by glaciers. Rising higher on these plains, they would finally approach the highest points, surrounded by tall, snow-covered peaks whose peaks poked through the huge, crystalline sky in every part of the horizon. These were mountains huge and old, with cliffs falling thousands of feet and glaciers spread wide and bright as ice flowing slowly downhill. Problems found at this altitude were difficult and varied. Sticking to the high altitudes above 12,000 to 15,000 feet, 3,600 to 4,500 meters, made mountain sickness a common and major problem for everyone, causing headaches, nausea and vomiting, tiredness, dizziness, and difficulty breathing. To those without experience, it can cause both serious illness and sometimes death. In the Pamirs, the weather tended to be sudden, may change in an instant, and was normally extreme. At any time of year, including summer, blizzards might come out of nowhere and trap caravans in snow, making trails invisible and blocking movement for days or even weeks. Passes in the mountains were generally narrow and very unsafe, with most lying at heights of thousands of meters above sea level. When the roads were blocked and covered in deep snow or thick ice, travelers were left to either stay safely on plains or try treacherous routes where a slip by either man or animal could fall them into frigid crevasses. Anyone near those caravans feared avalanches, caused by fresh snow, by winds, or even the sound the caravan caused, as they could collapse huge sections of the trail and take away whoever or whatever was in their path. It was common for loose pieces of debris, often large rocks, to come down hillsides after freezing and thawing cycles, giving very little time to respond. But in spite of all the dangers and the extreme physical effort, there was an overwhelming, impressive, and lasting beauty. Seeing how huge the Pamir Range is might make someone feel so tiny and brief beside the grandeur and vastness of nature in its purest form. When the weather was right, I could see for miles along the high passes, admiring the wonderful panorama of endless sharp peaks, deep shadowy valleys containing lovely bright blue waters, and the far away foothills that disappeared in the distance. During those still nights when the wind stopped, the atmosphere became so still and quiet that it was as if every answer had been hidden in the silence. Mostly Pamiri Tajiks, Kyrgyz, and Wakhi communities learned to live well in the tough areas at high altitudes. As they lived in cut-off highland settlements, carrying on transhuman pastoralism and farming, they managed to endure the thin atmosphere, great cold, brief seasons for growth, and a lack of resources for hundreds of years. The relationship between the people and their mountains was strong and unbreakable. Traditions, folklore, music, and deeply felt esteem for nature were all part of their unique culture. Many times, the hardy but quietly dignified mountain men, whose faces were strongly marked by the sun and wind, helped guide, carried, and supplied Silk Road caravans. Having a close understanding of the many dangers, the safest passes, and the hidden shelters helped any party cross these mountains alive. According to the Pamiri and other groups in the region, every major mountain, big glacier, important rock formation, and certain springs and rivers were all believed to have guardian deities that could be powerful and sometimes unpredictable and had to be shown respect. Small gifts, bread, salt, or a prayer, were given, old rituals followed, and they showed respect to sacred places and the gods of the mountains. To them, these huge range of mountains were full of spirit, just like people, and they were able to either bless them or bring tremendous destruction. Many generations have learned a special and powerful ancient love story, recounted often while sitting around yurts or stone huts in the highest mountains, its spirit never fading. It mentions a gentle and faithful shepherd, whose feelings were as pure as snow, and music from his simple flute brought peace to the ibex in the mountains and the eagles above. An ancient local story tells that the shepherd boy fell head over heels in love with a mountain fairy or peri, a charming, airy, and lovely being who was the daughter of an angry mountain god. Together their love was filled with passion, tenderness, and devotion, created through memories shared in the rooms of alpine meadows dotted with wildflowers, along with streams of pure melted snow. Still, it was an unaccepted love, as it defied the important boundary dividing ordinary humans from gods. The mountain god's anger was huge and dangerous when they were discovered together. Because he was so cruel, he turned his fairy girl into a snow-capped peak for all to see. She is the most beautiful peak in the area, but no one can reach her. She cannot speak, and her heart will never be warm again. So heartbroken that he was alone and joyless, the shepherd proved he could not carry on without his love. Alone in the deserted mountains, he played his sad flute, making sounds that filled the empty valley and plains with despair. Filled with such deep sorrow and true love, he, too, was later transformed. He turned into a wind that would always be near, quietly sighing and often howling as he restlessly moved around the top, reaching for her with his invisible hands and pouring out his raw, constant love and pain in the biting wind. The local people still say that every winter on their windiest days, when the snow covers the peaks of the Pamirs, a broken-hearted shepherd boy is desperate to find his lost mountain fairy. Many believe that the soft snow that falls on the mountain's still hikes during clear days is only his persistent tears for their lost love. Up on the elevated, breezy edge of the world, after struggling to cross a difficult pass and look down upon the Earth's vast folds, what real emotions did a Silk Road adventurer experience? Was there a moment when you realized your smallness, felt like nothing in the face of nature's impressive size, and saw just how brief our lives seem when set against the enduring mountains? Possibly, this incredible bird's-eye view stirred a strong spiritual connection with the universe, making someone feel spiritually and physically closer to the heavens, as if uniting them with the immense, silent energy that had formed such giants. It's possible that, for a lot of people, it combined both a strong, lasting honesty without ego, as well as a powerful, awestruck excitement, approaching celebration. The hardship and tiredness only explained part of it. The experience reached deep inside them and would never be forgotten. Few called the Pamirs something easy to cross. Rather, those mountains were the way to a spiritual crossing, a presence where humans could almost reach out to the unseen, and if one was willing to listen, they could hear the timeless voice echoing in the cold. Chapter 7. In Fergana, the celestial horses were promised, but the cost of riches was worth it. Coming down the treacherous Pamir Mountains, with their lack of oxygen and icy obstacles, the descending warriors must have seen the promised Fergana Valley as a lush, cheerful kingdom that appeared after a long, difficult ordeal. City travelers were delighted by the bountiful rice fields and the lush green valley in which they found themselves, between the tall Tian Shan to the north and east and the Pamiralai Range to the south and west, all nourished by the Sir Daria River and many of its tributaries. Imagine how great the caravan members felt when they began to descend and see the first hints of vegetation after escaping the rocky wilderness. The air would soon become more comfortable, offering the pleasing aromas of flowers, ground, and other growing plants. As snow atop the far mountains melted, Clear streams ran nearby and their bubbling waters greeted visitors. Rivers that had roared strong in the mountains now carried their water gently, and the farmers saw this as a wonderful blessing since they had faced drought for so long. Below, huge orchards with sweet apricots, juicy peaches, tender plums, pomegranates, and the famous Fergana grapes used both for eating and making wine filled out the lower reaches of the valley. Among the fruit groves, it was common to find broad cotton fields, along with rice, wheat, barley, and alfalfa, waters and rippling in the bright light of the Central Asian sun. Many villages and busy little towns were spread throughout the land, with their mud brick houses commonly found together close to a main marketplace or a central mosque, and each house usually set among green gardens and shaded courtyards. Its natural wealth and the industrious residents could be seen everywhere, making this a welcoming place. All across the ancient and medieval world, from China to Rome, the Fergana Valley was famous above all else for its amazing, almost mythical horses. They were not your typical mounts. The Chinese dynastic chronicles, starting with the Han and preceding, frequently described them as Tianma, or heavenly horses, or celestial horses. In fact, and perhaps most well known, they were commonly called Hangsuima, which means blood-sweating horses. The fairly dramatic name could have come about because these horses had a tiny subcutaneous parasite, Parafilaria multipapilosa, whose larvae, visible through the skin surface, caused a few small nodules to bleed, mainly during or after strenuous exercise or from the red-colored sweat dust could produce on light-coated horses. Anyway, the unusual spellings only added to the idea that James were supernatural and super popular. Because of their size and more powerful build, the Fergana horses were faster, longer-lasting, and stronger than the ordinary, often runty breeds kept by some Chinese and nomads. Securing the northern and western regions of their empire from the tough, well-moving Xiongnu riders was so urgent for Han Dynasty emperors that getting these fine horses became very important. The Xiongnu's cavalry moves rapidly, is difficult to catch, and proved very effective in attacking the Chinese, which is why China wished to obtain horses that were as swift and strong as or stronger than those of its enemy. The want for these horses was so strong that it led to many official trips, wide-ranging trading expeditions, and in some cases, outright wars to ensure the Chinese got a regular delivery of the animals. To secure these highly valued horses and animals, representatives and merchants from the East needed plenty of gold, silver, silk of the finest sort, as well as cultural awareness, clever diplomacy, strong negotiation skills, and courage. People living in the Fergana Valley, who raised and traded the famous horses, included both settled farmers, often descended from Sogdians, renowned for trade, and nomadic tribes. They were both skilled warriors and canny in their dealings. It was clear to many that their horses were special, so they were often hesitant partners in making deals. Talking points could take a long time to agree on, be very complicated, and leave the door open to misunderstandings, insults, or flat-out betrayals. Something like a slight etiquette error, annoying a local leader, acting too forcefully in business talks, or trying to avoid official rules could quickly cause a major problem and risk the peril of envoys, the theft of goods, or the whole plan's collapse. It usually took a great deal of patience, strong resolve, and a deep understanding of local culture and politics to obtain such four-legged riches, top military force, and powerful prestige. Residents of Fergana Valley and Central Asia looked up to horses as nearly sacred, and this high regard could be seen in their spiritual and unique cultural rituals. The importance of the horse was so strong in almost all cultures that many tribes had horse-centered traditions. People valued horses less for being work animals or weapons than for showing wealth, high social rank, military victory, free movement, or, in some traditions, as links to the divine. They were important figures in both Turco-Iranian mythology, stories, fine art, and the way the dead were treated. Sometimes, people believed that these powerful animals had their own spiritual importance, could quickly reach the gods, or would accompany and transport their owners to the land of the dead. The custom of sacrificing horses or burying them with honorable chiefs or warriors, displaying fancy harnesses and decorations, highlighted their great importance in these social and spiritual societies. These feisty and dainty horses captured the fierce life and beauty of the Fergana Valley. After conquering the difficult Pamirs, the Fergana Valley became a happy stop for Silk Road travelers, giving them all they needed to restock, regain energy, and feel protected. It became a significant commercial center where all types of people, traders, pilgrims, and ambassadors from east and west gathered to trade items as well as experiences, ideas, and stories. It also powerfully reminded us of the ways human desires, goals, and the means to fulfill them could be very complicated and extreme, involving both empires and individuals in important undertakings. Even though the well-known Fergana horses spent their days in beaming sun and lush pastures, the history of obtaining them was occasionally filled with battles and bloodshed, with a part of it happening through peaceful and skillful diplomacy. The valley's incredible splendor and fertility made it a key field for competitors. Their ready prosperity and potential wealth always rested next to real danger and strong human involvement. Chapter 8 looks at Samarkand and Bokhara, cities of Islamic architecture and endless love poems. Travelers continued along the Silk Road from the Green Fergana Valley, following the river to drier farmlands and finally to the steppe zones. Saint Etienne was heading to some of the most important, renowned, and cultured cities in Central Asia, whose names are still loaded with exotic charm and past accomplishment. Samarkand and Bokhara, instead of being simply places for people to rest and pick up supplies, they became stronghold cities loved by many, recognized worldwide for their beautiful jeweled architecture, active centers of education and scholarship, and their ability to draw together the traditions of Persia, Turks, and Islam. Think of all the excitement that must have filled the travelers as they drew near to places such as Samarkand, since its name could signify a city of stones and richness and had a history of key events. Thanks to the rule of eminent and ambitious leaders such as Timur, Samarkand evolved into the impressive, monumental center of a strong empire and was decorated with many of the most impressive and innovative architectural works in the world during the late 14th and early 15th centuries. Even before Timur and after he lived, throughout the memorable times of the Silk Road traveling through the region, Samarkand stood out as a major center for business, military, and learning, attracting travelers of all walks. As we approached, faintly, I could see the elegant domes and images of tall mosque towers scattered about the city. These intricately made tiles gleamed differently in Central Asian sunshine, reminding everyone of the priceless beauty of lapis lazuli and turquoise. The wonderful patterns and script found on the massive domes, the sheer heights of the buildings, and their extraordinary attention to detail were meant to fill any viewer with awe and remind everyone of Allah's glory and the ruler's strength and culture. Standing, for instance, in the wide, open Registan Square in Samarkand, which, in its most remembered form, features 3 marvelous madrasas, dated from 15th to 17th century and expressive of a long history of public spaces, was simply thrilling and must have immediately taken its viewers into a world shaped by bold artistry, significant knowledge, and real piety. The signal of daily prayers and studying, trading, making art, and living together seems to affect everything in these special areas. Bokhara earned the nickname Bokhara-i-Sharif for being a place of great significance, more ancient and continuous as an urban center than Samarkand. For many years, it was a leading place for Islamic scholars, jurists, and Sufis in the East, as learners and masters of theology, philosophy, the law, medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and poetry gathered there. A prominent site in the city, the Kalyan Minaret, once nicknamed the Tower of Death, but mainly used during the era as a symbol for calling Muslim worshippers to prayer, watched over the country with countless bright bands of brickwork. These old dome trading centers, known as Taki, in Bokhara, help conjure the busy days of Silk Road business, where people from neighboring countries eagerly shopped for fragrant spices, rich silks, finely woven carpets, jewelry, metalwork, and many slaves. Previously, the entire city was like that, but even today, its historic area is once again a fascinating web of winding, narrow streets, peaceful and concealed courtyards with ancient trees, historic mosques, and impressive madrasas, all of which make a lively scene at every street corner. Quieting places such as Bokhara's ancient libraries and Samarkand's serene madrasa courtyards gave haven to Islamic scholars and poets, many of whom were experts in theology, Quranic scriptures, jurisprudence, philosophy, and the expanding sciences of the Middle Ages. Visualize the unending poems by figures like Omar Khayyam, known especially from Persia, but also felt far and wide, with their strong words showing life is passing, joy is worth chasing, beauty and love, the comfort of wine, and the mysterious quietness of nature. also include the ecstatic mystical poems of Jalaluddin Rumi, living much later and farther west, but with strong Sufi links here that describe how love can make a human soul seek unity with God. You could just as easily consider the gentle, loving poems of Hafez of Shiraz, still Persian, but shared by Perso-Islamic culture, about how lovely worldly and spiritual love can be, enjoying brief, blissful times with wine and flowers and exploring the magical side of life, often gently touching on allegory. These very verses or similar-sounding poems might have been recited, discussed, and carefully copied onto scrolls in such learned and vibrant locations. Perhaps their poetic messages and sounds drifted on the lovely, carefully tended air of Persian Charbagh gardens, keeping the people who loved them calm while the city bazaar's market bustle and the desert heat remained. Both Samarkand and Bokhara truly mixed different cultures and were cultural centers known for change. Well before the Arab conquests, the immensely skilled Sogdian merchants established the lasting trade and settlement that is recognizable today in these regions. Persian peoples introduced their language, which turned into the main language across the region, and also shared their art, poetry, and good administrative techniques. The arrival of Turkic peoples brought their military talents, unique nomadic ways, native languages, and throughout history, ruling empires. The region's cultural diversity existed for centuries, but when Islam was introduced and consolidated, it influenced the region, forming a new and exciting culture for those cities. Throughout the markets, it was common to hear Sogdian, Persian, many Turkic languages, Arabic, perhaps even Chinese or Sanskrit being spoken. Faces from all over the world, whether from the cities of the Mediterranean, the Darim Basin, India, or the steppes of Russia, were visible here. One might find a wide variety of items, ideas, and artistic creations in this great civilization. Tired travelers along the Silk Road found these cities provided far greater benefits than simply rest, food, and limited dangers of the journey. They deeply fed my mind, heart, and spirit through what they wrote. The splendor of the building's design, the delicate, bright patterns of the many tiles, frequently filled with beautiful flower and geometric shapes, the elegant proportions of the arches and domes, and the calming greenery in the gardens perfectly expressed how people wished to bring peace, organization, and beauty to the world. Places where people learned, full of scrolls and books and active discussion, strongly showed just how much humans wanted to know about reality, themselves, and the secrets of the divine. Does great art and knowledge soften the pain and suffering of life and powerfully demonstrate human desire to achieve goodness and beauty? One can contemplate a lot when staring up at a splendid turquoise dome, or when hearing a scholar talk with excitement on a theological point, or when a poet recites verse that evokes deep emotions. In the majestic and famous cities of Samarkand and Bokhara, the answer was without question yes. Besides being points of exchange on the ancient world's main trade route, they were brilliant focal points of artistic, intellectual, and spiritual life, as well as symbols of exceptional human creativity. At such places, the wanderer could unwind, experience real inspiration from the treasured history of humanity, and find fresh direction in their travels. Chapter 9. The Southern Spice Route, India's Secret Power and the Dangers of its Jungle. At the same time, vibrant Central Asia's center saw many silk caravans roll westward toward the markets in Persia, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the Mediterranean. Another important and equally compelling aspect led others moving south. This route network headed toward the famous, diverse, and legendary Indian subcontinent, a land that was deeply admired and offered access to special treasures, as well as entirely different cultures, religions, and landscapes. Starting on this southbound journey introduced me to a land full of ancient knowledge, lively, varied spiritual traditions, and exciting, almost magical, scents from rare goods. The shift from the dry and mountainous parts of Central Asia, seeing Afghanistan as an example, along with some of Pakistan, to the regions leading to the Indian plains was usually steep and noticeable. Some routes, such as those leading from the tough, snowy Hindu Kush mountains across Gandhara or Bactria into northern India, took travelers into hotter, wetter, and eventually tropical or subtropical parts of India. The dry and crisp air would begin to feel wet and steamy, particularly during monsoon, and the landscape greened, turning from scarce spreads of shrubs or forests into huge and thick forests. Great and holy rivers, Most notably the Indus and the Ganges and the many tributaries they supplied made the land what it was. Thanks to their waters, people in ancient times had cities, farmland, and crop yields. Interaction with the old and sophisticated Indian civilization changed the views and broadened the minds of countless merchants, scholars, pilgrims, and adventurers from other countries. India was famous for its complex philosophies, complexly structured society, mainly the caste system, and religious traditions that were very old, but also vibrant and full of varieties. It was India that Buddhism first originated in the mid-6th century BCE, then moved across the Silk Road to the north and east through the efforts of dedicated monks, interested travelers, and faithful followers. Today, visitors coming south would find themselves amid the center of the earth of this important religion. At the same time, they would experience the constant effects of Hinduism, such as its wide variety of gods and goddesses, its many epic stories, its elaborate rituals, its sacred books, and its traditional philosophical ideas. The peaceful teachings of Jainism, which began in ancient India, led to many followers as well. Scattered throughout the country were magnificent Buddhist monasteries and famous dome-top stupas that typically appeared in regions with a Buddhist past. These places were used for worship and served as active schools, centers of culture and gathering spots for travelers. People often found refuge here, ate shared meals, spoke with learned monks, and observed rituals and cultural activities that were occasionally similar to, but mostly quite different from, their own traditions. At all social levels, people in India were influenced by karma, the idea of moral causation, samsara, the cycle of different lives, reincarnation, and choosing liberation or enlightenment. Many foreign travelers who were exposed to these concepts found them quietly surrounding and sometimes deeply impacting their lives, and these visitors brought them back as part of the things they collected on their journeys. What people in the Middle East sought from India became legendary, and these goods were usually quite different from the silks, ceramics, and lacquerware China sold. Traders regarded spices as India's most important trade product. Picture for yourself the overwhelming odor of Malabar pepper, the creamy cinnamon, the complex notes in green and black cardamom, the medicinal smell of cloves and nutmeg, and the fragrant warmth of ginger and turmeric. No, they were used for much more than taste. They were important for cooking, medicine, perfume making, cosmetic products, and also in ceremonies. They were considered highly valuable even beyond their areas of origin, and people all across the Middle East and the East paid a lot for them. In addition to other items, frankincense and myrrh contributed more to the exotic trade. Despite coming most often from Arabia and the Horn of Africa, they were usually traded along routes leading to Indian ports. Sandalwood, which had a wonderful scent, was considered important for making religious images and burning as incense. In addition, India was famous for its gemstones. Glittering diamonds from old mines such as Golconda, deep blue sapphires, fiery red rubies, and lustrous pearls produced in India's mines or unearthed from nearby coasts around Sri Lanka. For centuries, jewels were placed on the heads and bodies of kings and queens, as well as wealthy elites worldwide. India's luxurious cotton textiles, muslins, calicos, and others were highly praised, and their transparency and fine texture led people to call them woven air or morning dew. Such light, soft materials were popular in hot climates due to their great comfort and good looks. Sometimes, peacocks with their beautiful feathers, plus elephants or rhinoceroses, were included in the exports to foreign rulers' zoos. Nevertheless, the trip through this land of fruitful harvests, traditional knowledge, and storied wealth was fraught with new and serious challenges. India's rich ports on the western and eastern shores or its large urban centers often meant crossing the dense jungle, quite different from the deserts or mountains travelers might have known from the rest of the Silk Road. The thick layers of trees, figs, and vines made it hard for the sunlight to come through, so the forest below was often shrouded, humid, and always a little cramped. Instead of thick dust, the air was more damp, mixing with the odor of decay and filled with the regular sounds of monkeys, colorful birds, insects, and large, dangerous things stirring in the foliage below. People heard stories and sometimes even saw of temples from old times, with intricate carvings of obscure deities, ruined by plant life that kept creeping in, while the sacred gardens got too thick and the mysterious secrets they once contained faded away. Powerful wild animals such as tigers, leopards, elephants, rhinos, and big snakes could be found in the forests, ready to threaten and sometimes kill any who were not ready for them. Furthermore, people were vulnerable to mosquito-carried diseases such as malaria, dengue fever, and dysenteric illnesses easily found in the sticky tropical environment, making effective treatment almost impossible for travelers. A lot of talk circled around subtle tales of ascetic hermits, sadhus, rishis, or yogis, living alone in the forest to devote themselves completely to meditation. Harsh tapas and beat the cycle of being born over and over. Managing long periods of fasting, they were often extremely thin and their bodies covered in holy ash. Their hair was unkempt and many of them wore the color saffron or, among certain groups, were nothing at all, Digambara Jains or Naga sadhus. People believed that they possessed great strength of character, sound advice, and sometimes even powerful gifts, calling them siddhis. They might have the strength to survive in extreme weather, lack food, or be without water, be able to speak to animals or move natural elements, or hold prophetic powers or do other special things. Since the prospect of speaking with a wise man who lived deeply in the jungle was both hazardous and unpredictable, most simply avoided the issue. But for those who valued spiritual wisdom, the hope of receiving advice, blessing, or guidance made it an inviting adventure. During certain deep, quiet times in the jungle, at dusk or dawn when the border between worlds seems closer, some people can hear mysterious, unsettling sounds. Was it a quiet animal, a faraway night bird, a rustling bamboo, or might it be something far weirder? Because this environment was full of life and energy, I couldn't help but imagine that some influence, an ancient spirit guarding the forest or something with different intentions, was slowly making its presence known. I didn't always get the chills in the woods, but instead was always made aware of a strong sense of spiritual, mysterious, almost sacred power behind the dense green of the forests. I was conscious of something watching me from the distant past, something on which I stood, reverenced by much older cultures. This route offered people many chances to experience tastes and smells, learn about different faiths, and meet challenges they had likely never faced. Here, everything seemed to belong together. Jasmine, champaka, and sandalwood blended with the smell of the jungle, while monks talked about wisdom in the stillness of their temples, and colorful moments everywhere filled the place with a visual thrill. Meanwhile, they had to manage the many subtle and obvious dangers of a jungle, filled with both lively and lifeless things, and a strong spiritual feeling. Chapter 10. Getting to the west, facing the sea, and meeting other people. Those fearless, rare travelers who had set out on the entire Silk Road journey westward through Persia, Anatolia, and the Levant experienced a moment like no other. That first glimpse of the sea. You could have come across this color in the Mediterranean Sea at major Roman and Phoenician ports, whether in Syria, Lebanon, or Egypt. On other routes north from Egypt, ancient traders may have found themselves on the powerful waters of the Black Sea, ancient Euxine Sea, visiting towns such as Trebizond, Trabzon, on Anatolia, or Olbia and Chersonesus in the Crimea. After months and sometimes years spent on their overland journey through deserts, over mountains, through huge steppes, all the while fording rivers, seeing the sea ahead must have seemed unbelievable to explorers. It showed they were about to finish a vitally important time in their long and demanding history. Suppose a group of travelers, their packs and animals worn down by long travel, appear from the hills of Syria or sea-worn Anatolian coast, much too tired to go farther. And just when you aren't looking, you see it, the beautiful, ever-moving sea, extending all the way to a distant, shimmering horizon where the blue of the water and the blue of the sky mix together perfectly. The weather would change and the dustiest, driest air would be replaced by the distinct, sharp, salty smell of the ocean. A smell that would be novel and exciting to those who had only experienced nature far away in the continental interior. You would find the sounds of ocean waves as they hit the sand or the rocks, the calls of the gulls, the squeezing sound of the ship's wood in the wind, the way the sails flap, and the lively, busy babble of languages in numerous tongues. Captivating, but initially it could be quite confusing. Ancient ports were unique and lively places filled with many cultures, and perhaps even more so than many of the biggest inland settlements along the Silk Road. At the edge of the land, where the water met the land, the Mediterranean/Black Sea maritime world became connected to and reached its end from the overland routes that came from the east. Ships with high masts and fluttering linen sails, each port influenced their appearance, would keep arriving and leaving for all parts of the classical Western world, such as the Italian peninsula, Greece, Egypt, and North Africa, the Iberian Peninsula, and numerous ports along the Levant and Black Sea coasts. Shops and marketplaces then would have been filled with all kinds of people, resembling a real-life ethnographic museum. Travelers might notice Roman merchants and administrators presenting themselves authoritatively, Greek sailors and ship captains with sun-weathered faces from years at sea, Syrian and Phoenician sailors and traders who continue long maritime traditions and are successful traders, Roman merchants, part of many Jewish groups scattered everywhere in the world, Egyptian workers on boats and islands supplying thriving markets from the Nile Valley, and even Gaul or Iberian slaves, mercenaries, or traders from the edges of the Roman Empire. They would all, however, come together, however briefly, with the newcomers from distant Persia, Central Asia, India, and even the famous series China. If people from all over had gathered, their various faces, skin colors, clothes, and endless chatter in foreign languages would have made for a vivid and sometimes confusing display of humans. All of the precious materials that were carefully and dangerously moved thousands of miles, Chinese silk, Indian and Spice Island spices, porcelain, lacquerware, rhubarb, musk, and precious stones, would now be placed on the ground by tired camels and mules. They would pass through customs, face levies, and then be carefully set up for their journey by sea, since they were headed for the main markets of Rome, the growing capital of Constantinople, or other crucial cities. In response, merchandise from the west began its long trip overland to the east, steered by new convoys or by the returning travelers from the original group who now planned their homecoming. Roman glassware, gorgeous and clear, rich wool from Europe, amphorae with fine wines from Italy, Greece, and Spain, prized olive oil, an abundance of gold and silver coins, plus metal products could be found in these goods moving westward. Trade in these lively ports also included more than only things like goods and resources. Scholarly thoughts, unique philosophies, and a wide variety of faiths began to spread slowly by land and more rapidly by sea along the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Karma, compassion, and mindfulness, valued by Buddhists, might have appealed to the Greek thinkers who would meet Bactrian or Sogdian merchants or even certain daring missionary monks. Thanks to its presence in Central Asia and Persia beforehand, Nestorian Christianity had already built churches in several of the eastern Mediterranean's port cities, connecting the east with the west. This religion, called Manichaeism, created in the 3rd century CE by the Persian prophet Mani based on Christian, Zoroastrian, Gnostic, and Buddhist ideas, easily spread on trading routes to the east and west, and people following it could often be found in major trade centers. Meanwhile, the writings of Plato and Aristotle, the Stoics and Epicureans' ideas, and the formative stage of Christianity in the Roman Empire would have been at least recognized by Easterners who came through these ports. Those who learned might have done so by speaking with teachers or markets, sometimes using interpreters, observing customs and religious activities, or, for a few who read, by consulting translated writings or interacting with local academics. You could see different beliefs, cultures, artistic ideas, and forms of science thriving and combining in these coastal cities. Having traveled tirelessly for such long periods, seeing great danger at every turn, and finally coming upon this new land and its unique culture, how must a traveling person have felt on the inside? You might sometimes wonder with kindness. I'm sure they felt great satisfaction from accomplishing what they set out to do, even if it had become hard at times. They had experienced the dangers of the desert, faced off with mountain enemies, escaped from bandits, suffered from disease, and braved the loneliness of the road, and they had still continued. They made it to the west, the very people's dream that had seemed a distant, almost legendary story to those who left their towns and homes at the start. Even so, underneath the excitement was a different kind of loneliness, as if I didn't quite belong. Now, as strangers in a distant place, their ways, their language, and how they looked might make them stand out. Once the business needs led people apart, the shared experiences and friendships of the caravan were starting to disintegrate. People from smaller, simpler groups may have felt frightened and even dismayed by how big, well-organized, and powerful the Roman or Byzantine world was. Is it possible that for some people this point is not the end, but the start of truly amazing adventures? For certain people, getting to the Mediterranean or Black Sea coast was a stopping point before their journeys ended. It is possible that they would embark on their own journeys, puzzled by tales about Rome's treasures, the learning at Athens, and the amazing things found in Alexandria, eager to learn more about this complex Western place. Some people would now concentrate on the dangerous journey home, with the reward of so much new knowledge and things collected over the years, once more crossing and surviving the hardships of the deserts and mountains and having seen both the far west and now the far east. Even though it doesn't last, love in various guises could have been felt here just as easily as in any other place. Brief meetings between Easterners and Westerners, eating side by side, conversing haltingly in a crowded tavern, receiving kindness and notice from locals or sharing moments of curiosity and friendship might leave deep, vibrant impressions in people's minds. Despite their occasional transience or unimportance in major events, such personal connections were an essential part of the Silk Road, serving to link different, emerging members of a growing global community. Where the sea meets the land, many found a starting place. Say farewell to the road you've traveled and begin a new adventure at the shore. Chapter 11: Conclusion. Impact for generations. How we continue to feel lost and hopeful. Today, the heavy caravans that used to travel the harsh routes of the Taklamakan or the Gobi are streaming past less often than before, no longer at the heart of commerce. The enormous and powerful empires that once encouraged, safeguarded, and were very successful from the great, continent-wide trading flows, such as the Han, the Tang, the Kushan, the Sogdian cities, the Persian Sassanids, the Roman and Byzantine empires, the mighty Islamic caliphates, and the Mongol Khans are long forgotten. Whereas cities such as Chang'an, Samarkand, Ctesiphon, and Constantinople used to be full of people, they are mostly places of quiet archaeology and are mentioned by historians and poets as some of the greatest of the past. After serving as the main crossroads for global trade and culture for centuries, the Silk Road may have lost its superiority as seafaring explorations. The age of exploration and changes in geopolitics and technology rose. The old routes are now hard to spot under the new sand drifts of the deserts or under asphalt from modern roads. Landmark cities and humming oases are but picturesque ruins today, with their stores and institutions dissolved by the steady lapse of time. Despite many centuries in the past, the amazingly rich story of the Silk Road is still being discussed and discovered with increasing detail. To be clear, the true importance of Silk Road was not just about the usual dealings of silk for horses and spices for gold. Its most important and lasting effect is subtle, a careful and lasting thread within our modern life. This background can be heard today very clearly and boldly, along all the years since ancient times in different societies, religions, traditions, science, and genetics. More than anything, it remains a story of amazing human courage. This story was written by countless unidentified people, known or unknown, who kept trekking beyond what they knew into the unknown, regardless of danger. Facing great dangers and even possible death, they went far from home following hopes for their family's welfare, interest in learning, completion of official tasks, or simply hunger for more knowledge. This book shows how our species somehow always finds a way to survive and thrive, no matter how adverse the situation in Earth's most hostile places. At its core, it reveals how people have found various ways to. For generations, the road, in all its different sections, stood as the key pathway for distant people to communicate, share knowledge, and influence each other. It led to a vibrant connection that went well past simply trading for goods. Well-known ideals, much like seeds blown by the wind, were sown in land far from their beginnings and burgeoned into new kinds that often mixed various ideas. Buddhism, which started in India, made its way over time peacefully and patiently across these routes to influence the culture and religion of Central Asia, China, Tibet, Korea, and Japan. Chinese inventions like papermaking, printing, the compass, and gunpowder spread slowly from east to west and ended up changing the world's history. By combining different artistic designs, styles of architecture, types of music, and literatures, the peoples of Europe produced bold new styles that improved all the participating cultures. This is an account of ordinary people who, despite unpredictable situations, somehow intersected. Visualize two or more people gathered by a flickering campfire full of desert stars, poles apart in backgrounds, cultures, traditions, and communication methods. Simply by being together and eating, mending, caring for the sick, or looking as one at a silent moon, humans could feel a little of what each other lives through. Nearly unbreakable friendships could result from going through hard times, and some loving but intense relationships also came and went, leaving behind as souvenirs the sort of memories everyone might wish for, both beautiful and permanent. It's a fascinating story of faiths moving forward, usually pushed not by military force, but by the inspired actions of individual monks and nuns, by the philosophical talks of scholars and their ilk, and by the modest religious observance of traders and other travelers. For vast stretches across Eurasia, religious beliefs and ethical values slowly flowed and shaped people's spiritual lives. In addition, it tells how knowledge grew much larger when travelers, scholars, and diplomats returned from travels, as they introduced to their homelands valuable, never-seen-before understandings of geography, cartography, medicine, pharmacology, astronomy, mathematics, agriculture, and metallurgy, helping to form the common intellectual and scientific foundation of humanity. The Silk Road represents not only a notable event in history, but also a vivid picture of the basic urge of humanity. Deep inside, many people crave something: to explore, learn, make connections with others, and understand more than their ordinary day-to-day life. It demonstrates that the most beneficial outcomes, achieving real progress, understanding, or developing insight, occur when we have the courage to deal with outsiders, be open to their beliefs, and be ready to grow due to new and surprising events. We may perhaps experience this if, when busy days are over, we become still and attentive enough to hear what sounds like the far-off memory of that ancient journey. This can show up as a growth in wanting more meaningful relationships with others, at home and away. People might want to grow in their understanding of different cultures, to appreciate alternative belief systems, or to search for knowledge in many ways. Perhaps it brings back a fresh interest in the world's broadness and depth, and how small and meaningful our personal place is within it. It might also be a soft, inner desire that leads us to start uncovering our own inner paths and exploring what is hidden within us. Because this inner path is specific to each of us, it urges us to grow stronger with every change, regard the unknown with kindness, nurture love for all beings, and work hard to reveal the wisdom and true connections that are ready to be found in us and in our world. In essence, then, the most important gift the old Silk Road gave the world is that we are not truly divided, but all travel together on this planet. Fates similar to the links on a huge cosmic loom, our paths are always weaving together, influencing one another both in ways that are obvious and in ways that we do not see, and helping shape the continuing and ever-altering tale of human history. It continues to shine as a lasting reminder that people never stop wanting their lives to be better, and that they continuously hope for what is greater than just material things. Knowledge, genuine human connection, and the unfolding human story drive this story at its core, moving freely beyond barriers and stretching beyond time. So, dear friend, now that our long and thought-filled journey has brought us here, let the calm and gentle sound of this old, rich story help ease your thoughts and mind. Allow the gentle timbre of desert wind, of ice-bound mountain breeze, of peaceful silence, and of distant ocean waves to lead you easily into a peaceful slumber. In that warm, open landscape within you, your unique Silk Road will appear, full of soft light, calm joy, and a continuous parade of valuable, restful, and meaningful dreams about unity, curiosity, learning, and peace. Go on a journey, even when you are asleep.